Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is the third week covering the Path of Daggers, although saying third week is a little bit of an inaccuracy because I'm actually recording this just a couple days after the first diary has come out, meaning the second one has not come out, and then I'm going to be recording the fourth one of these next week's video tomorrow at the time that I'm recording this video, of course. I'm quite a bit of the way through. In fact, I'm a few chapters into what I'm going to be talking about in next week's video, but today we're going to be covering chapters 15 through 24. Thankfully, only a couple major storylines to go through in this one. There's a little bit of a bridge chapter in between them, but mostly we're covering Egwene's POV stuff, and then we're covering Rand's POV stuff in regards to the confrontation with the Shan-Chan. That is essentially what this section is going to be about, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. Although I have to say, coming at this probably from a more spoiler-free point of view, first of all, this week's reading wasn't quite as good as last week's reading, in my opinion, mostly because I found some of the Rand storyline to be slightly underwhelming in certain ways, which we'll obviously get to when we're talking about those few chapters. But overall, I did still enjoy myself. I really liked the Egwene stuff especially, and had me pretty hyped and really itching to read more. So I'm coming up pretty close on the end of the book now, and I gotta say, as of like a precursor to my final thoughts here, what I'm anticipating will probably be the case by the time I'm actually done with these last few chapters that I have to read tomorrow morning, and before I record the last diary tomorrow and the review of the book probably as well. I gotta say, this is definitely the weakest book of the series from a more objective standpoint in terms of the actual structure of it and some of the decisions being made, especially where it kind of exists following a Crown of Swords, that make it notably objectively, as much as you can use the word objectively, because of course you can't really use that when it comes to opinion-based material. Path of Daggers, like I said, as much as you can be objective about it, is objectively the weakest of the 9 books that I've read so far in the series, but I've enjoyed it quite a bit nonetheless. Kind of the way that I put it in my most recent, at this point, Fortnite on the Isle video, is that while it does feel like the weakest, I would probably have a hot take on where I would rank this in terms of enjoyment, at least how it's sitting for me right now, where I'm currently at, again, a few chapters away from the end of the book. I'm enjoying it a lot more than I feel like I'm supposed to, and that I have any right to, and that has kind of been an interesting understanding to come to as I've read the book overall. But I guess we should actually jump into what I've been reading. I spent about 8.5 hours reading this week, which was, again, a step up from the past couple of weeks in relativity, which were both less than 7 hours. So a little bit more time spent on it this time around, which would make my total through the end of this week's content at somewhere between 21 and 22 hours of reading for the Path of Daggers, which is funny because that means by the time I finish the book, it'll have actually taken me a little bit longer to read this than The Dragon Reborn, which The Dragon Reborn is actually longer than this one is, and I'll have read it in less time than Path of Daggers. So jumping more into a spoiler-filled context, so kind of jumping into this section here, I will say chapters 14 through, what's the math on this? Good grief, I don't even know. 14 through 19, the 5 Egwene POV chapters were all pretty good. I actually really enjoyed myself with these chapters. I find myself not disliking Egwene at all. It seems kind of weird. I think some of the reaction that I've seen from the series at large is that a lot of people tend to fall into either you don't really like Elaine camp or you don't really like Egwene camp, more or less from the beginning of each character's existence. But I don't know how true that is, but that's kind of the impression that I've got, and I've not had problems with either of these characters so far. So Egwene's storyline in A Crown of Swords I really liked for the short amount of time that it was there. I've really liked the other girls' POVs as well whenever they've been there, Elaine and Nynaeve, and whatever they've been doing for these couple of books. I've enjoyed all of that stuff, which means that chapter 20 being Elaine and Nynaeve there, even though it is a little bit more of a bridge, not much that actually happens in there. It's more of okay, we're setting these people in a location so that we can pick up on them later type of thing, or pick up on affairs in that location a little bit later type of thing. And the last few chapters are Rand POV, basically actually doing what the 2 POV chapters at the end of last week's reading were setting up regarding conflict with Shan Chen, kind of as I hinted at before. So we'll start off talking about chapters 14 through 19 of Egwene's POV stuff. Because again, I really enjoyed all this, and there's actually quite a bit to get through, so, you know, I don't want this video to be over an hour long, but it's probably going to be anyways. Egwene has been having a lot of dreams recently, most of which she's not been able to remember, let alone really pick apart, but a handful of dreams she is able to remember. The ones that she does remember, she knows are important, but she's unable to come up with an explanation for what they actually mean or anything like that. So here in chapter 15, where the rebel Aes Sedai have been traveling basically through Mirandi, I don't know actually what the country's called. I think I'm just going to call it Mirandi because it's easiest, I guess. Egwene wakes up and it is actually winter time in this POV, so I've kind of an interesting way to utilize the changing of the weather in this book. I kind of realized while I was reading this POV is you have the Bowl of the Winds plotline ending there in like chapter 6 or something like that, with the actual, you know, the Bowl of the Winds used. And then basically every POV, every little storyline from that point up through here, you have gradually getting worse weather, gradually getting more stormy. Of course, you see that in Rand's POV a little bit later as well, just having a lot of bursts of random storms. And Egwene's stuff is all in the snow. It is winter at this point. So Egwene wakes up here at the beginning of the chapter in winter, the recent winter here, to Swan having a message to deliver to Egwene, and also Halima just outside saying that she shouldn't disturb Egwene, but because Egwene's already awake, she says it's not a bother and goes with Swan anyway. So Egwene goes with Swan to the Amerlin study, which is kind of a separate tent in the camp, kind of goes over there to where Gareth Bryne awaits them to report some information of his own. Swan says that Halima shouldn't be, you know, sleeping with Egwene in the same tent, like kind of being there, like there's something improper about that from an Aes Sedai perspective that Swan isn't necessarily the most comfortable with, for example, but Egwene basically kind of refers to the way that Halima is able to heal her headaches, to get rid of her headaches in a way that nobody else is able to, and that's why Egwene allows it to happen, because she kind of needs to free herself of headaches in order to be able to sleep. What the cause of those headaches are, I don't think has ever really been clarified. Like, I don't think it's really been put to page. And I'm still curious about why it is that Halima is able to heal the headaches. I'm predicting that it's because of the male half of the one source, and that's why Egwene doesn't really know or understand it. But again, I don't know if that's something that's been confirmed or not, or if that's just been speculation that I haven't realized has been said anymore with. But that's still something that's going on with that plot line. The meeting with Bryne, however, in the Amerlin's study, Gareth warns Egwene of an Andoran and Mirandi army to their north, so basically a collection of Andorans and Mirandians approaching to kind of warn them off, and that's basically what we learn a little bit later in the storyline. But Gareth warns Egwene of all of this, and Egwene has him go to set up a meeting with some of the heads of the army, basically resolving to stay put where the camp is for just a few days in order to avoid potential battle with the oncoming army, and also in order to be able to set up like negotiations to be able to have with them. Egwene also mentions after Bryne has left, so just mentions with Swan privately wishing to break the requirement for Aes Sedai to have the 3 oaths, like kind of wishing to break that requirement in some way, be able to break the bonds, break those oaths. But Swan kind of insists that that's basically what makes the Aes Sedai what they are, so some sort of moral argument from her side. Swan says that Egwene should also trust Bryne, specifically as far as like, you know, whatever decisions are to come up for the army's future, but there's like a little bit of a romantic angle there that Egwene's starting to see coming out of Swan there. Apparently she's actually romantically interested in Bryne as much as she wishes to deny it. And Egwene also has Swan tell her, you know, her personally sworn Aes Sedai. So the Aes Sedai that have sworn fealty to Egwene specifically has Swan go to tell them to go ahead and go to make a sort of Aes Sedai meeting with the armies to the north as well. I'm not sure what actually came of that. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure we'll kind of get to it later, but I don't remember if anything came of that, but that was something that I noted in the chapter itself. Chapter 16 moves to Egwene calling a meeting with the Hall. I believe it's the next day, yeah, the next morning, basically. Calls a meeting with the Hall of the Tower, the Hall of this rebel tower here. Announces the paused movement for just a few days because of critically needing repairs, citing this reason. Afterwards, she also tells Swan to go over... After this announcement, whatever reaction comes afterwards, Egwene and Swan go over some pretty dismal reports for most of the day regarding the status of the camp, like less gold and not being able to trade as easy, other problems like this. Swan also realizes that the sitters of the hall just kind of all of a sudden, she picks out and points out to Egwene that like all of the sitters of the hall down here are pretty exceptionally young to be sitters of the hall, which seems kind of suspicious to her. Not sure what that's going to end up meaning at any point in time, but Swan does point that out. Lelaine and Ramonda of the Hall come in while these two are kind of talking, while they're going over these reports, and these two come in to discuss the Sea Folk, especially in regards to what Rand's been doing with them in Carrion, understanding that Rand has been having negotiation with them in Carrion to some degree. The sitters also kind of get into some amusing political discussion and argument in this moment, which again, I just thought it was kind of confusing. I didn't really find any of it to be worth really noting, but I did find it amusing nonetheless. Later, afterwards, both of the other sitters of the hall, Lelaine and Ramonda, have left and kind of gone to do their own thing, but later they each come kind of independently as well, revealing that they know that Egwene has made arrangements to meet with the army to the north, that she's made private agreements here using Gareth Brine, and each, Ramonda and Lelaine, separately, in each of their separate meetings with Egwene, they insist that they need to be the one doing most of the talking when Egwene goes, because Egwene insists on going to meet with them herself. And so both these two are like, okay, well, we'll let you go, but you have to make me the one to go do the actual talking for you. And both of them say this to her independently. Afterwards, Swan comes to say, basically immediately after both these other women go do their thing, Swan comes in to say that the meeting has actually been arranged now, and that apparently everything is as exactly as Swan and Egwene have been plotting this whole time, putting the hall exactly where they need to be. So some political maneuvering, specifically of Egwene and Swan, within the Saladar camp, even though it's not in Saladar anymore. It doesn't really matter. Point is that there's a lot of political maneuvering stuff going on that Egwene's basically forcing through in order to kind of get a little bit extra respect for her name, and also kind of convince the other Aes Sedai that, like, I'm the Amyrlin seat and you're not just going to use me for your own ends, actually, because I'm the Amyrlin seat, and trying to get a little bit of that kind of foothold in there. A little bit of a side note during this chapter is that it's revealed at some point that a couple of Egwene's like personal servants have kind of disappeared. Don't know precisely what that's about, but it was kind of made an important point in the chapter, so I figured I would note it anyway, even though I'll probably forget about it from this point on until, you know, it becomes relevant, much like a lot of other stuff in here. At the end of this chapter, at the end of chapter 16, there's also a couple like miscellaneous POVs. There's not any other miscellaneous POVs for the rest of Egwene's storyline in this book here, but there's a couple of them here. The first one is very short, of Arengar, so Halima musing over a buried corpse, a corpse that she's just buried, about how she's basically forgotten what living as a man was like. So I'm not sure who the corpse was that she's buried. I'm presuming it might be her male form, like her pre-revived form that she's buried, but I don't know why she would have that body around, so I'm not so sure that's the case. It might just be somebody else. Maybe it's one of Egwene's servants. Actually, this is kind of something that I'm just coming up with off the top of my head. Probably an outlandish theory, but maybe the corpse that Halima has just buried was one of Egwene's servants that has just disappeared, because I feel like I remember at the beginning of A Crown of Swords, in the little bit of Egwene's POV that was in there, that Egwene asked for a couple of her servants to kind of, you know, search and ask around who was kind of around the tent when Mogadeen was freed at the very beginning of that book, you know, at the end of Lord of Chaos as well, in the epilogue, since that's also technically when that happened. So maybe Halima's kind of discovered that some of the servants were looking around trying to find that answer, and they were getting a little too close for the truth and maybe killed one or both of them and has buried their corpses. I don't know. Have absolutely no idea if that's the case, but that's a theory that just came into my head just now. So maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Don't tell me one way or the other, because I would like to find out if it ends up being important. There's also another POV at the very end of the chapter here, another very short one, but this one is Sheriam, who is, of course, Egwene's keeper, being jumped by some unknown person and being punished for kind of some unknown and unclear reason, or at least if it was like in there, I didn't really pick apart what it was actually meant to be. She's supposed to be uncovering information for whoever's been, beating the crap out of her in this section, but it's kind of unclear what that information's supposed to be that she's supposed to be uncovering and who it was that was doing the beating. It's just something that happened. So that's kind of unsettling, but nevertheless, we move on to the last few chapters of Egwene's POV here. 17 sees Egwene being joined and escorted by Sheriam, her keeper, Swan Sanche, and I'm pretty sure the entirety of the Hall of the Tower here, and also Gareth Bryne, to meet with the Andoran nobles, who are kind of, the meeting that was organized with from the Army of the North. Gonna have a meeting here. Apparently also Tamanes is also here as well, who's, kind of leading that portion of Rand's army in Mat's absence as they've been moving around. Egwene is glad for a large witness audience because of the political motives that she has for doing what she's about to do. In the meeting, it's basically discussed that the nobles, everybody from the Army of the North, does not want any of the Aes Sedai rebels to be entering Andor because they'd be getting a little bit too close to and thus risking kind of war, all-out battle with the Black Tower. And of course, nobody in Andor wants that to happen because that would be pretty disastrous. Egwene assures them that that is not her intention to do right now, that the Black Tower is not her concern at the moment, because what she is doing, she, kind of usurps the control, quote unquote, of both Ramonda and Lelaine by making this announcement herself, by talking with the Andoran nobles herself, instead of using one of them as a speaking piece. Again, some of the internal political stuff that she's doing within this portion of the tower. Egwene says that not only is that not the target, but that her current target right now is to see the band resting for about a month, kind of on agreement with Gareth Bryne that he wants everybody to have a month of rest before they just travel and storm Tar-Valon directly. Egwene announces here that her target is Tar-Valon because Elida's a usurper and, wants to take her place, usurp her, and then replace her as the Amyrlin seat in the official tower itself. She announces, just kind of says, we will actually be staying for the next month here now in Mirandi, and that anybody who is capable of wielding magic is allowed to train with the Aes Sedai now. So a couple big announcements there. Training with the Aes Sedai is a pretty big one that'll probably have some big implications. Of course, suggesting that Elida is not a true not the true Amyrlin, that there's political stuff going on, that is the Aes Sedai's target right now, is to go to Tar-Valon directly and lay siege upon it. Pretty big stuff, actually. Chapter 18 sees Egwene finding and talking with Tamanes after some agreements are made with all of the Andoran nobles, because for some reason she wants to talk to him specifically. During this meeting, Tamanes asks about Mat, and she knows that she can't really say much. She says that the last she's heard, Mat was in Ebu Dar, but doesn't really want to give anything away explicitly, so that's all the information that she really gives Tamanes regarding that. Tamanes says that he feels like the tavern pole of Mat is kind of pulling him to the south, so that kind of confirms those feelings. Again, Egwene basically says that the last she knew of him is that he was in or around Ebu Dar, and that's about all she says. Tamanes also says that he will stay in Mirandi and help to kind of centralize some of the political affairs going on here, to kind of help stabilize it, I guess, kind of do all of that kind of work, and then afterwards may actually go south directly to find Mat, and Egwene makes him promise to stay out of any war if he can. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that storyline going forward. Who knows? Because Mat has hitherto not been in this book, and with only 4 chapters left, I am fairly certain he's not going to be in this book at all. So I bet that's stuff that might be picked up in Winter's Heart. But with that little bit of meeting kind of being done, Egwene decides that like it's getting late enough in the day that she wants everybody to go back to the Aes Sedai camp because she has one last political announcement that she wants to make, kind of really set her foot down and kind of finalize her placement like at the head of this actual camp, doing what it is that she wants to do politically. She decides to make that decision, and so everybody heads back to the camp. Chapter 19 is the end of Egwene's POV in this book up to this point. I believe there's probably another chapter here at the very end of it that will get into it, but for this little section of the storyline, this is it. Having revealed prior that Egwene knows about Siuan being smitten with Gareth Bryne, she and Egwene discuss kind of Siuan's productivity as of recent, her level of attention as of recent, on account of Bryne. Just kind of found this a little bit more amusing type of stuff. It was like, do we strictly need these moments? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Bryne and Siuan going forward. I just found these interactions in this chapter amusing. But getting back to the camp, Siuan and Egwene have organized for a sitting of the hall, and a pavilion is erected for, it's noted in the chapter only the third time since Saladar has there been like an actual pavilion been erected for a direct organization of the hall here. Egwene at this point and all of the sitters gather within the pavilion. Lelaine and Ramonda are there, intending to chastise Egwene for taking control with the nobles rather than letting either of them be mouthpieces. But Egwene kind of gets ahead of the game, and at the very beginning of this little sitting of the hall here, asks for a count of supporters like directly within the sitting of the hall to declare war on Elaida, kind of what she said that she was going to do with the nobles. She's now back here at the sitters of the hall saying like, hey, everybody in favor of waging war upon Elaida, say aye. And of course, like some of them are a little bit more hesitant to do so because Aes Sedai don't wage war against a specific person, generally speaking, seems to be one of the main reasons why some people are a little bit hesitant about this. But ultimately, this motion does get a majority of supporters, and as a result of the law of war, as I've put it here in my notes, despite the very precarious political tensions within this whole group of Aes Sedai here, and also in spite of the handful of sitters who are not in favor of this motion to wage war, Egwene must now get her way, because if there's the majority, like I said, everybody then has to support just kind of inherently. They're inherently bound to supporting the rest of the hall as one unit in this movement. And so Egwene announces that after the month of rest in Mirandi, kind of like what she was saying to the nobles, like, we will be staying for a month here, and then we'll be waging war against Tarvalon. Yeah, so Egwene announces here that after the month rest, they will travel to lay siege on Tarvalon. So pretty big political implications for stuff, and thus setting up what is probably going to be a pretty exciting sequence with an actual siege upon Tarvalon. I don't know if that actual thing will happen in like Winter's Heart or in any of the next couple of books. It might be that takes a little while to get through, because like these couple of books here, Crown of Swords and Path of Daggers, have only gone over like a couple weeks worth of time, maybe. So for, all of Egwene's camp to be waiting a month before they actually move on, it might actually take a book or two for this to actually happen based off of the pace of the actual time frame of the books. But that was something that was pretty amusing and interesting. So moving into chapter 20, we have the one little bridge chapter in between Egwene's section here, and bridge isn't the right term because it doesn't actually collect the two POVs together, but it does separate them. So we'll say the little wall of a chapter that exists here is Elaine's POV before we get into the few chapters that are Rand's POV. So chapter 20 sees Elaine and co traveling to Camelin, having gotten through the gateway at the end of the little exposition. Not even exposition, because it wasn't exposition. The first 6 chapters of the book saw everybody from Ebu Dar end up through a gateway in Andor to make their way through Camelin. Chapter 20 kind of picks up with that, and again, with a little bit of the snow and the weather kind of obstructing a little bit of their travel. The first couple pages are kind of dedicated to Elaine anonymously asking the populace of Andor their thoughts regarding the sort of political climate of Andor, regarding like Rand and holding the throne for her, and her mother and herself. You know, like I said, anonymously, these people don't realize they're talking to Elaine Trackend, so she's able to get like honest opinions from everybody. It seems to be the case that many of Andor's people think that Rand killed her and or Morghese, and some of them think that he's the reason for the bad weather, which, in accordance to the people trying to travel to Caemlyn right now, causes what Elaine says should have been a 2-week journey to be much, much slower than that in actuality. The Aes Sedai do not get any information from Ispen, because this entire time, ever since they've came through here, they've been trying to get information from Ispen regarding the Black Aja and the Dark One, probably whatever it is that she and anybody's been doing. And some of them come to the conclusion that Black Aja probably have taken some form of oath that makes it impossible for them to reveal information, something like that. Who really knows what's going on? But all they know is that they're not able to get information from Ispen, and we'll see if that actually has something to do with the future of this plotline. I wonder if there's going to be like some major breakthrough that allows them to do that. And at the end of the chapter sees Elaine and Nynaeve going to sleep and trying to meet Egwene in Tel'aran'rhiod, but only finding a message in Tel'aran'rhiod instead, where they plan to meet, that basically it's just kind of burned there in the wall. It says like, stay in Caemlyn and don't say a word, because of course, Egwene's got to get her political foothold in so that Elaine and Nynaeve don't get in trouble for doing whatever it is that they're doing, or don't have any resistance, or nobody comes after them for whatever reason. So it's like, just stay in Caemlyn, don't say anything. We'll figure things out when it comes time for that. So we'll see what happens. That's maybe the end of the Elaine plotline in this book, but I don't think it is actually. Yeah, the chapter that I'm on right now, I'm currently on chapter 28 at the time that I'm recording this video, and this chapter is probably another Elaine POV. It says Elaine in the first line, so. Even so, that's the end of the Elaine POV for the purpose of this video. So we'll go ahead and continue on to chapters 21 through 24. Last week, I originally said that I was planning to read through chapter 23. That was before I realized that chapter 24 was still this Rand plotline, this, sieging with, not sieging, this kind of, I guess this climactic battle event with the Shan-Shan here. So I actually got a little bit further in the book for this week's reading than I had originally planned to. That's okay, though. Let's go ahead and actually talk about it. I will say, before we get into the actual details, again, kind of reiterating what I was saying earlier in the video, is that I was slightly underwhelmed by certain aspects of this. We'll definitely come back to this at the end of the section. So, chapter 21 sees Rand. He has begun scouting around the Shan-Shan, despite some pretty poor and stormy weather. Kind of bringing that up again, it's kind of complicating certain aspects of this waging war against them. But Rand has nonetheless begun scouting around the Shan-Shan, and has also stationed his army outside of Ilion to wait for various Ashaman to return with some of his royal followers, so like people from Tyr and from other areas that have, people under their control as well. Just some of the royal followers whom he doesn't trust the most. I'm not entirely sure why these are the specific people he brings over to be in this sort of battle climax type of thing, but that's what he does. Rand, at this point in time, again, for reasons that I'm not entirely sure of myself, Rand starts to see double and get sick anytime he touches the source, which is, I'm guessing it's probably some after effect having to do with Lews Therin having returned again. I don't know if this is going to cause them to have some sort of joining or splitting or something at some point in the next couple of books, because it feels like that's what's being built up towards. It's hard to tell, because it's just kind of going back and forth between different mindsets with this character dynamic, I guess, Robert Jordan has been doing for a couple books at this point. Really hard to see what's happening, but hopefully something happens there, because it's starting to get annoying again, I will admit. Either way, Davram Bashir is one of the folk who has arrived for him to lead the battle, and Narishma arrives with a package for Rand. Not entirely clear what that package is, but he's gone out and gotten something for Rand to be able to use in this battle sequence. So basically just kind of a slow build up to stuff going on here. Chapter 22 was equally relatively quote unquote slow, just kind of more building up tensions regarding some of this stuff. Yeah, Rand's army moves at the beginning of this chapter to Altara to launch an attack on the Shan-Shan. Unfortunately, some of Ilian's kind of rebels have come with them somehow, and one of them tries assassinating Rand in chapter 22. This causes Rand to kind of take the source to try to defend himself and throw up and fall out of his horse and all this kind of stuff. So some kind of insecurity that Rand's starting to feel now on account of being unable to control himself in regards to the power and in his leadership position, where he feels like he can't be like getting sick and falling off his horse, because that does not inspire confidence, to say the least. And there's also some reports here at this point coming from some of his scouts of finding Shan-Shan, so the army basically makes to kind of move around. And that's what the next couple chapters are, is basically ambushing and targeting and attacking specific groups of Shan-Shan that are just kind of around in Altara, just moving around in Altara, stationed in different places in Altara, and to kind of make their army seem a little bit larger than it is. At this back half of chapter 22 is a Shan-Shan POV, actually. I forget the character's name off the top of my head. I think his name is Acid Bakuan. Don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm going to say Acid because that's what I'm going to say. It doesn't really matter. A Shan-Shan camp is nearby to Rand's group here, and that's specifically the group that one of Rand's Ashaman scouts would have been talking about there just prior. This camp, led by Acid, is basically told about from some of their own scouts, from somebody riding one of the Reckon. He's told about Rand's army being about 10 miles away at this point. Acid is fairly confident in victory and survival, despite some problems that he's been seeing within the Shan-Shan, kind of here in Altara around Abu Dar. And that kind of sets up for a battle that we don't actually see on screen, actually, but there's been a problem with the Shan-Shan that I kind of hinted at just there. There is something going on with the Damani and both the Soldam as well that is made using the magic not entirely reliable at this point. I'm guessing it's some effect of the Bull of the Winds, kind of like one of Rand's Ashaman. I forget which one it was. Flynn, maybe? I don't remember who it was. One of Rand's Ashaman had been scouting around Abu Dar in the last time his POV was here in last week's video, that had mentioned that like Side-In doesn't really work the way that it's supposed to around Abu Dar. You get to see a lot of this stuff happening around in here as well, and it seems like the Damani are kind of affected by something that's making the magic kind of hard and uncomfortable for them, making some of them sick to some degree. So I'm predicting that the usage of the Bull of the Winds has just really affected the use of magic, the stability of magic, I guess, within this area, within this region. So there's plenty of people just kind of having a hard time with that. That's something that this particular leader within the Shan-Shan had noticed in this POV and was like, you know, even despite this, I'm not worried about being able to beat an army as small as the one 10 miles away from is. So they kind of make that attack. Chapter 23 starts with the aftermath of some attack or ambush on the Shan-Shan. I'm presumably the one with this group that had just been, you know, kind of discussed and hinted about at the end of the last chapter, but this actual attack itself was not on the page. So we see the aftermath of some of that with the Ashaman basically doing the bulk of the battle both here and in the future of this battle, because of Rand not really being able to touch the source without just getting really sick and splitting vision and problems of that sort. Rand begins taking some of the captured women prisoners, so like the Damane and the Soldam as well, and leaving the captured men behind after they kind of leave the area, because what are a handful of Shan-Shan really going to do in the region? Don't really need them. It's fine, Rand thinks, so that's what he kind of does. We shift to another Shan-Shan POV, a general named Furik Kharid, I'm guessing it's pronounced, but it's probably something different because welcome to Wheel of Time. But this Shan-Shan general leads a large army, mostly non-Shan-Shan. A lot of it is Terabon. And then there's also a little bit of Altarans and other people in here as well. I forget off the top of my head, but there's, a large army, but most of them aren't Shan-Chan in this particular gauge, or in this particular case. Furyk Kharid is trying to gauge info on some of Rand's forces, who seem to gather very suddenly in various different parts amongst all of their different camps and their outposts that are just around in the mountains. It seems impossible for them to be able to form so suddenly in different ways, and as such, Kharid kind of assumes that Rand's army is much larger than it actually is, which we'll get into a little bit more as well. One of Kharid's men in this moment reveals that he has ordered some of the Shan-Chan scouts to just kind of move ahead instead of allowing for free flow of information back to them. So a slaughtering ambush occurs against some of them and against Kharid's camp. So that's something that happens. Just a lot of disorganization amongst the Shan-Chan within this set of chapters. We also move once again right after this to another Rand POV here, who has been waging war here in Altara against the Shan-Chan for multiple days. You kind of get another time jump to multiple days after the first attack to having done this a lot. Most of his soldiers, again, are still kind of the Ashaman, still fighting in the valley below. Up here, Rand is kind of waiting in some particular location while a specific battle is going on, where Warimon and Bashir kind of hold his flanks. Rand sends some of his last couple of Ashaman bodyguards to help with some of the fighting that is going on actively before being attacked sneakily once again. An attempted assassination, not really an assassination per se, but, getting sneak attacked from the north, despite Warimon having been stationed up there, by some of the Shan-Chan who somehow made it past Warimon, and a counterattack is pursued and executed by Bashir, who comes to help save Rand. Rand is healed by one of his Ashaman named Mor, who I guess was kind of, with Bashir, I guess, is kind of the implication there. It is also learned at this point that the Shan-Chan are in more or less full retreat to Abu Dar, and some of the nobles want to go ahead and move forward and take the city from the Shan-Chan, and others think it's probably best to leave now, so there's some political tension within the army here. That's some of the stuff that happens. But chapter 24 is the last one we're going to talk about this week, and also the one that's arguably the most packed with stuff going on. We start off with, it has a lot of back and forth with POVs. Several of them are very brief and only like one-time appearances, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But there's a little bit of Rand, a couple of different points, but it has a lot of POV from another Shan-Chan person named Kanar Mirage here at the beginning, and then a brief one that we'll talk about at the end of the section here. Kanar Mirage has a dismal outlook of the conflict because he's, again, kind of looking at some of the actual numbers of the armies and trying to figure out how it is that what's been going on against the Shan-Chan has been possible to go on, kind of similar to the previous Shan-Chan POV, but a little bit more in an official point of view. Kanar Mirage assumes after some of these battles, some of these outposts going on, he assumes that Rand has a lot more people than he does. Again, kind of bringing up this point. He thinks that Rand has, something around 90,000, maybe 50,000 people. I don't remember the number actually at all. I probably should have wrote it down, but I just wrote down that he overinflates Rand's numbers and kind of where they're at, assuming that he has about 10 days for Rand's army to really regroup, this very large army, supposedly, to regroup and to be able to rally against Abu Dar, so he feels like he has time to kind of prepare, a defense, I guess. High Lady Suroth of the Shan-Chan is here, however, from, having come from Abu Dar directly. She's here and tells Mirage the truth of the numbers, that Rand only has about 5,000 or 6,000 people, which is more accurate, and that they are using traveling to move about the different outposts, and that's why it seems like they have so many and they're attacking way quicker than seems possible. It's not because they have a very large army split between all of the different outposts, because they're just jumping from one to the next, basically. Suroth asks Mirage to be ready to march to defend the city because they're kind of nearby. Rand's army is kind of nearby and wants to be able to take them right now. So Mirage asks for all of the Damani, despite their kind of being in a weird, rough state and condition, to be released to him, because he makes the point to Suroth. It's just like, okay, well, in that case, they're powerful. They've got something with them that's allowing them to do a lot of damage. So we need to be able to do all of our damage that we can now, because if we don't, we're going to lose. So he gets all of that approval. They march out to Rand, hoping to cut the 10 miles that split them a bit short, and also, to ambush Rand, because he wants to be able to get there before Rand will possibly know that he's been moving. They cut the distance to about 5 miles before deploying some of their forces and Damani to launch an actual attack, even though something still seems to be off with the Soldam and the Damani. Maybe similar to the Ashaman, kind of like what I was talking about before. I think it's probably something related to the Bull of the Winds and just the way that it's probably destabilized part of the, I guess, the magical lining of the world here. I don't know if that's how things particularly work, but that's the way I'm interpreting it for the moment. And as a random aside and a side note here, Suroth has, come into the tent to talk with this sort of general of the Shan-Shan with some of her slaves on her, and Leandrin is one of these slaves. I don't know if we knew that she had become a slave of somebody at some point in one of her last POVs, because she hasn't been on the page for a little while, if I'm not mistaken. But it did give me a little bit of whiplash to see and recognize that name, just like Leandrin. Wait, Leandrin, she's a slave of the Shan-Shan? Okay, that's interesting. I don't know where that came from, but again, interesting. We'll see if that has any effect on this storyline question mark on, I guess, the Shan-Shan and how they interact with the series moving forward. Who knows? But maybe. Rand is making a final move against the Shan-Shan, flipping over to his POV in regards to the battle, warning of the 50,000 remaining Shan-Shan here, who could still very well overwhelm his forces, because, when you have numbers and a big difference in numbers like that, it doesn't matter if you have a lot of Ashaman, especially when they have Damani on their side. Rand has primed everyone for movement, waiting for a scout to return announcing that the Shan-Shan are actually a little bit closer than they once were, having closed a little bit of that distance, hoping to, ambush Rand to some degree. So Rand kind of works with that. It's like, okay, well, we can launch this attack a little bit differently. Dashiva is apparently not so crazy as he seems to appear as well, because in this moment he convinces Rand that Sidon is in fact being a little bit weird, because moving closer to Abu Dar, it's been harder for the Ashman to control it. We've seen this happen, and Dashiva, like, point blank actually says to Rand, like, you not paying attention, because this is actually the case, makes Rand look at the weaves, noticing that there's some shivering or some quivering with the actual magic itself that makes it hard to wield, let alone hard to actually get weaves to go through in the intended way, because Rand is skeptical, but, he's able to see that this is the case, but continues to basically forcefully ignore it from this point on to set his forces in motion against more of the Shan-Shan. From this point, you have a handful of brief little battle sequences kind of in these short POVs, like I said, just a couple pages long in each case, kind of jumping forward different stages of the battle, but most of them aren't really important at the end of the day when it comes right down to it. You have maybe a couple interactions that are maybe interesting to note to some degree, like Bertome, Colavera's cousin, overhearing Warimon and Gedwin having some sort of heated discussion about something, he doesn't really know what, before they then decide to harass him over Colavera and her being supposedly murdered by Rand, strangled by Rand. Don't know why this harassment occurs, but it occurs here. Word comes of a large Terabon army that these guys need to go to defend against, so they go do that. You jump to a different Shan-Shan POV, a figure named Varric, taking a message to a battle zone to receive to see that the person who's supposed to receive the message is dead already, and that the camp has been attacked. The Shan-Shan have the upper hand with some of the Damani in this particular instance, but then something goes wrong with them, so you see a little bit of the shifting of the tide, and Varric deciding, no, we're probably going to have to retreat from this particular location, even though that's not something the Shan-Shan really tend to do. You get another POV after that, where another Shan-Shan comes across Mirage's body, coming after an attack that occurs, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. This other Shan-Shan right now orders a retreat at the very end of this moment, basically at the end of the chapter, and Rand's end, for all intents and purposes, according to the Shan-Shan, have been achieved, if not beautifully. But again, we'll talk about that in a second, because the Shan-Shan are full-on retreating, so it's basically the second full defeat that the Shan-Shan have had since kind of returning to this continent. But that takes us to... there's also a POV of Bashir there in the middle there doing another kind of battle sequence, like discussing some of the movements of the armies. But again, because it doesn't really actually do anything, and then we see the end of this part of the battle just now where Bashir's here with Rand again all of a sudden. It's like some of this stuff doesn't really need to be said. I think this chapter was a little bit bloated and again a little bit underwhelming because some of this stuff was like, these scenes didn't really do anything. They just kind of were time jumps, like, okay, here's a tense moment within this battle that some of these people are dealing with. Let's jump to the next one. It's like, yeah, but you didn't do anything with that, so I don't know what the point of it was. Either way, you move into basically the last little section of the chapter that I haven't talked about, being that Bashir has told Rand that the Shan-Chan has reformed and is nearby. So again, another one of these moments of needing to launch an attack. Bashir recommends for Rand to take his forces out now, to kind of leave, that they don't need to continue going on this battle, that it's probably dangerous to do as much. Rand, however, decides to reveal that he has Kalendor, and this was the package that he'd received from Narishma. He wields Kalendor and unleashes a lightning storm, which at first seems pretty cool, but he does lose control, however, and ends up harming a lot of his own forces in the attack, which this attack seems to be the one that kills Mirage's little group, little army. I'm not sure if that's the case, but that seems to be the implication. But again, I don't know. Not a lot of the battle stuff in this chapter was particularly clear. And after seeing what he's done, Rand decides to actually follow Bashir's advice at this point, and he thinks that he's failed in his attack against the Shan-Chan here. So both of them are kind of leaving here thinking they've lost, even though Rand has mostly won the battle because he's caused the Shan-Chan to more or less fully retreat. So that's something that's worth noting. A personal note that I also want to say here, which is kind of regarding what I was saying about certain stuff being underwhelming. I thought that this, kind of confrontation with Rand and the Shan-Chan would be a little bit more than it was. It would be a little bit different, that it would come in a different form rather than these kind of like little mini, quote unquote, episodic type of little bits and pieces throughout. You're kind of jumping between a lot of POVs you've never seen before and you'll probably never see again. So I no idea what was really going on with that. But I didn't love all of this Rand POV stuff. Like, there were some cool moments within it for sure, but most of it just kind of underwhelmed me. I wasn't as satisfied with it as I wanted to be, especially after those couple of Rand POV chapters from last week's reading, where I was like, this is definitely setting up something that is going to be really cool and really epic with Rand and the Shan-Chan, and then it was just kind of all right, I guess. Like, it wasn't bad. It was just kind of different from what I expected it to be from a structural standpoint and from an epic standpoint, and also the fact that Rand doesn't really do anything there because he gets sick when he touches the source. Just kind of, just certain mediocre aspects to some of this that I didn't love as much as I thought I would in this moment. Like, it's kind of a climactic sequence to some degree, but I didn't find myself actually really loving it the way that I wanted to. And maybe not even in the way that I should. So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing. I've really enjoyed a lot of what this book has had to offer, but I would say that the battle between Rand and the Shan-Chan was probably the most disappointing part of it for me, and the part of it that I'm looking at and thinking like, man, I wish there was a little bit more to that, and I wish it was a little bit better. And like I said, it's not even like it's bad per se, it's just not really what I expected and not really what I wanted either. So it's a bit unfortunate, but that is certainly the case. Either way, that is the end for this video here, wrapping things up. It's the end of discussing what has actually happened this week. For next week's reading, I've already read a few chapters into that where we've gotten, it's kind of concerning that I've already forgotten a little bit of what it is that's actually happened in these few chapters. But it's kind of like a couple bridge chapters, got a little bit of like intermediary stuff with the White Tower that I really enjoyed and that I'm excited to talk about next week. And then what seems like is going to be a little bit more of like some finale type stuff. Kind of like Rand actually kind of getting back into some of the political side of things, as far as like the nations that he controls goes, dealing with some of that stuff for his next couple chapters that he's in. One of which I've read, one of which I haven't yet. And then it seems just kind of based off of like very like this minutest of scanning ahead on some of the chapters here, that there's going to be some stuff like more or less finalizing a couple of these other POVs that have happened. Again, I mentioned that like the chapter that I'm on right now is going to be Elaine stuff that we'll be able to talk about. There's probably one here that's Perrin as well. So just a few chapters left for me to read tomorrow, and tomorrow I'll be recording the last one of these diaries as well once I'm finished reading the book. But yeah, that's basically what's been going on here. Not anything more to talk about today, and I don't want this video to be any longer than it needs to be, so we'll go ahead and end it there. I'm looking forward to finishing the book tomorrow and being able to record that last diary, because there is some pretty good and exciting stuff, some pretty big implications regarding some of the information that we've gotten in just the couple chapters that I've read here for next week's reading. So I'm excited to talk about some of that and the actual end of the book next week, as of the time of this video is releasing, and if you're watching it at that point. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. If you did, I'm looking forward to the end of this book here. I hope you're looking forward to hearing some of my thoughts on that, and that's what I'll be working on here very soon. You guys will see that next week, and then I believe my review, my spoiler-free review of the book, will probably be like the week after that last diary, so keep an eye out for that as well. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.